with Robbie.
Robbie, I'm the president of Refresh. We are a esports entertainment media business. We run a tournament series called Blast Pro, global tournament series. We will stop at 3 destinations in 18 and 8 in 2019. We also own and operate a Counter-Strike team called Astralis, which is the best in the world, and another Counter-Strike team, and something else in the making as well, which is not quite in the press yet, but that's who I am.
I'm Ian Congdon and I work for the NEC group. I'm the head of venue sales for the NEC arenas. So I've got a couple of venues that Robbie might be interested in talking to me about after the panel's finished. But we were fortunate enough to host the first ever ESL Dota 2 major in the UK in May earlier this year. It was a first for the UK, first for our city, first for our venues. We learnt a lot, and I think by virtue of that I'm probably the leading expert in UK arenas in hosting esports tournaments at the moment. Yeah, there are other events around the UK. Wembley have had a crack at, I think it's a Face It event in CSGO, and we're also looking at growing up our portfolio of events in the venues.
Todd, I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at Delaware North. We're a hospitality company based in the US, but with business here in Australia. We also are an owner of an esports team called Splice, and we also own some venues in the US, so we've hosted events as owners of the building as well.
Jeroen van Iersel, very easy Dutch name, marketing manager for the Johan Arena.
How easy that is.
Formerly known as the Amsterdam Arena. We're a 55,000 capacity multifunctional stadium. We've done esports events for 3 or 4 years now, not the really large ones, but capacity up to 4,000 or 5,000. So quite some experience.
Todd, I want to kick things off with you having hosted a few events and attended dozens of others. There are a lot of misconceptions still. Those misconceptions are dwindling, but they still do exist. So just as a baseline to get this narrative started, can you provide us with an illustration of who is attending these events?
Sure, and I was hoping Rich Creswick would still be here. If anyone saw him this morning doing this with his fingers, describing the athletes, I think Rich might have a few of those misconceptions. I mean, the audience, you heard a little bit this morning, maybe the audience is overwhelmingly male. It is more men than women. You'll hear people say it's very young. It's not very young. Most of the people that attend these events can buy a beer. They're certainly affluent, more affluent than you imagine. The funny thing is I was looking at some demographics so we own a building, as I said, and we own an ice hockey team in the States, the Boston Bruins. The Boston Celtics are also our tenant. I was looking at the demographics for those two teams for attendees, and it is virtually identical to esports. Basketball and hockey are 2/3 men, 1/3 women. Many esports events look like that today. Again, so it's not as young as you think, it's not as male as you think. They certainly have more money than you imagine. We were just talking right before we started here about some of the hospitality, and you see a lot of buildings, and I'm not going to jump ahead, but you see a lot of buildings today shutting down some of their craft offerings and some of their more premium offerings when they host an esports event, and that's just wrong. I mean, these people have money, they want to spend it. Again, one of the early sessions they talked about, it was Rich, talked about the experiences. People want to pay for these experiences. So yeah, I think people are getting to learn this audience a little better. And by the way, it's not completely homogenous. I was a fan at the Birmingham event. I'm not the average fan, but it is a wide range of people who go to these events.
And even beyond age or gender, these are individuals that a lot of times are entering your arena for the first time. They don't have a preconceived notion on what an arena experience is. They've never been to a Boston Bruins game before. So can you talk about the challenges and really the opportunities with that fact?
Yeah, I mean, we hosted, one of the big events we hosted in last year was the League of Legends Summer Finals in the US at the TD Garden across 2 days. And just like Ian was telling us before we started, we surveyed people after the fact to say, what did you like, what didn't you like? We also asked questions like how often you've been to the building before. I mean, we are the premier indoor venue in Boston and really in the New England area. We had 75% of the people say they'd never been to our building before, not for a concert, not for a sporting event. I mean, this is a customer that isn't coming to our buildings for other things. I mean, this was the introduction to some of these people. And just looking at it from the hospitality side, these people haven't grown up with our offerings, and I'm going to give you the very US-centric version of this. They haven't grown up thinking hot dogs and peanuts and nachos define the sports experience. So they don't necessarily want those things. They want other stuff. They want, not better food, because these are great hamburgers and hot dogs, but they want something different. They aren't indoctrinated into that sports, cult that we all have been, who were hockey fans and basketball fans and so on.
Are there any specific alternative menu items that come to mind as being successful?
I just think it's, again, Ian's going to tell these stories. I mean, he was talking about his experience hosting this Douek tournament and that everything went really well, and I can tell you as a fan, it was a great experience. But the catering, the expectations are higher. They want different stuff. I was in Vancouver for the International a couple months ago, for the Big Dota at the end of the year event, and they offered us hot dogs and nachos, and I'd been to other events where you've got soba noodles and you've got this and that. It doesn't have to be particularly fancy. And in fact, I talked to our chefs after the fact. I said, you can do cold soba noodles, right? You can do that in volume. Of course you can. But it's just getting your head out of the mindset that we're going to serve the same thing again and again to these fans.
Ian, we've alluded to you a couple times, and you provided a great tease in your introduction, having recently hosted an event. Can you tell us a little bit more about that event and the logistics behind putting it on?
Yeah, I think it's not just a traditional inquiry where somebody wants to rent your venue. It's about understanding the event, understanding the organiser's needs, and because there's so much demand from other cities and a desire to host it, it's about what the city can bring as much as what the venue can provide as well. So we need to engage with local partners. So we talk with local government, we talk with regional development agencies, we've got a West Midlands Growth Company involved, so they can help sort of support the event and spread the news about the fact that we've got this great event coming to Birmingham. Birmingham's got a fantastic digital economy and digital community around the city anyway, so being able to network with that was important, not only to maybe the visitors to the event, but also the promoter as well. So they want to see where they can generate leverage for sponsorship. So we opened up those avenues. We supported them with citywide marketing as well, and we also included, as part of the venue package, a hotel booking service. So it became more of a conference rather than just a traditional, you rent your event, you roll up your trucks and you're gone the next day. It was more about what the city and the whole package could deliver. So we realised pretty quickly we were in quite a tough fight with other competitor cities to be able to produce a compelling proposal to attract the event.
That's going to make the difference, right?
Yeah.
It's a massive juggling act as a rights holder to think about where you're going to be and where you're going to play and which cities you're going to go to. And, it's amazing to see the differences in terms of the welcome, right? So those who put on that service, and I'm flying out somewhere this afternoon to do exactly that, and it's A to Z. He's got the radio stations lined up, the ticketing companies lined up, he's got, tourism boards, etc., etc. All of that lined up for me. That's fantastic. The ones that just basically turn around and say, give me 100 grand for 3 days, well, it's tough, right? Because then you've got so many other components that you've got to solve. I need to book something like 700 hotel rooms over a weekend, or 700 nights. I've got to fly in something like 250 people. There's a massive amount of logistics associated with catering and transportation, let alone the shipping of equipment and production. So the more the venue itself can help you take that on board, the better it's going to be for rights holders and tournament organisers like myself.
And Ian and Robbie, I'd like you to play off each other, if you would, and speak to the technology requirements. And for venues that don't currently have those technology requirements, what are the logistics behind bringing all of that in for 3 to 5 days?
You want to go first?
Yeah, I mean, the main issue for us, having hosted worldwide broadcast events in the past, I said we host indoor athletics, indoor gymnastics, other sporting type events, boxing, you name it. We host those sorts of events, but what we don't provide as a venue is connectivity. The broadband and the IT requirements are something that has to be brought in extra. So I think as a long-term aim for ourselves, we realise what the requirements are now, so we're looking at investing into that infrastructure and having that installed as part of what you would call venue package, because it's very expensive and probably cost prohibitive to an event organiser to come and have to spend 20-30 grand install an IT line that's big enough to take the bandwidth. So that's one thing straight away. And as an aging facility, we realised quickly, some of the cooling needs, just the basic hygiene factors, keeping the place cool, keeping the servers cool that are driving the games on stage, and the production is a big challenge because it gets really, really hot. So we need to upgrade our cooling capability as well, and we need to provide additional infrastructure for maybe isolated or transportable air conditioning, or perhaps even look at investing in server rooms as well, or additional room spaces that can host that sort of technology.
Yeah.
So it's not just about the stage and power and lights. It's wider than that.
Yeah, I mean, because we were in a venue a couple of weeks ago, and I was wandering around the back of it, and I was like, holy crap, this is really worrying. There's a shitload of cables here. I'm not technically gifted, but I was like, what would happen if? And I went to my head of production, what would happen? He goes, yeah, we'd have a problem. And I was like, that is stuff that we want to avoid happening. There's things that venues can't avoid happening. There are challenges with broadcasts, there are challenges with satellites, etc. That that's not your responsibility, but you need to be able to provide us with the infrastructure and the ability to put it on in an adequate way. And also, not up the cost like in a ridiculous way. No, don't charge the premium, because the premium can be built out in another way. I mean, the F&B side of your business is fantastic, getting the food right. I totally agree with that. But you should be able to generate really good revenue off of the customers coming through the door in a way that you wouldn't do hosting a conference or a concert where they might just buy one drink. Back onto the F&B side. An event in Copenhagen, the Royal Arena, we put 12,500 people in there. We ran out of food by 4 o'clock. That you cannot do, right? And it's unacceptable for the venue itself, and it's not a great experience for the fans. But the technology piece is crucial to us. So again, I don't want to throw it out there and say there's so much for you to do, but putting on an esports tournament, which is, 10,000 people in a venue, 50,000, I don't know how many, but it's the millions that are watching worldwide that really count for me. So the technology is more important than anything else.
Yeah.
Jeroen, am I pronouncing that
close
enough?
Yeah, it's close enough.
I'd like to bring you in
and
certainly comment on what the other panelists have suggested, but also let's steer this into how you really creatively use your hospitality spaces for the event in your building.
Yeah, what we started 3 years ago was experimenting with esports, and esports is it's not one sport. It's the same as sport. Soccer isn't ice hockey, and NBA basketball isn't American football. And it's the same with esports. So it's also really important which type of esports are you doing in your venue. If you have a FIFA tournament, it will take maybe for 3 or 4 hours. It's totally different than doing a League of Legends tournament or a Hearthstone tournament. So I think you have to be really careful there. Also with the audience that you're getting in, it's totally different. So partnering up with the organizer months before makes a lot of sense, because then you can really feel your target audience, and you can adjust the setting of your venue and your catering and all your tech to your audience. What we did when we started with relatively smaller ESL events, but only in the hospitality rooms. We got a new part of the building 6 years ago, capacity 5,000 people, with all kinds of different rooms. The largest room was 1,000, so we could do a large variety of different esports games or matches in one building. So we didn't even use the bowl of the venue, but we only started with a smaller event, and that's when you learn, because if you have to stretch all the technique, even for the smaller events, and then you can organically grow in the years.
I absolutely love that case study, using the hospitality spaces for the actual event, and really using all levels. I believe the different levels of hospitality in your building serve different functions. Can you describe those for us?
Yeah, we have, the building is 5 stories high. There's a larger event area for 1,000 people, general public, so you can show the larger finals. But we also have a VIP restaurant level where you can pick up your sponsors, giving a business conference. So all those levels we even built the Media Markt. I think in England, I don't know if it's well known here, but it's a really large store that only sells televisions, computers. We built in a total store into the building, even when the store is 100 meters from the stadium, just to keep the crowd in. So it was more like an indoor festival than it was just an esports event, and that made it really interesting.
Robbie, have you seen any other unique, notable sponsorship activations similar to what was just described?
Well, I mean, I think it's important to understand how traditional esports tournaments work. I mean, they're long, right? So they're a couple of weeks, like the major that was in London recently is a couple of weeks long. So, albeit we totally want to shy away from that, right? As an organizer, we actually want to keep them as short as possible. So we go in and do a tournament over a day and a half. Because we believe actually the attention span and the experience is far better by compacting it in. So actually, we do something completely different. We have these huge LED screens and we have 3 simultaneous matches going on at any one point in time. No one else in the industry does that. And it makes for an amazing viewing experience when you're in the stadium. But I think we've only really the tip of the iceberg on the hospitality and the sponsorship side. We are just basically painting the same picture that was the sports industry back in the day. We've got to think completely differently. We've got to shake up what traditional sponsorship and hospitality should be. I'm looking at the hospitality events organized around my tournament in 3 weeks' time in Copenhagen. I'm like bored reading the list because I'm like, this is not cool. There are some investors coming in and people involved who are super high net worth. They want something different. So, we've still got a long way to go. Sorry to say that.
And Todd, I want to bring it back to you on the hospitality side. We've talked before about how suites are being used and perhaps better stated not used for these events. What are your thoughts on utilizing suite space?
Well, again, I couldn't agree more that we need to be far more inventive with the space. First of all, Rich talked before this morning, the idea that these premium experiences, and there's a small percentage of people who are willing to pay for it. Absolutely, they're willing to pay for it, and they'll pay big money for it. And so when you look at the premium spaces, which, in Birmingham, I don't think you did offer suites, because Iersel does the suite offerings. I don't know how many.
We did. There wasn't a great take-up, and in all honesty, the majority of the suites we used for partner activations.
I'm not sure the price point was correct. I think that's one of the challenges, because they're affluent, but they're not corporations, right? Generally, the people coming, I'm glad to pay the 230 quid or whatever it was for the premium ticket, but the 2,300, I think, for the suite or whatever was a little much. But I think we do need to break out of the box. We've got these great hospitality spaces. You've got great suites. Think about how we can do it. Again, think about the length of these tournaments. Think about how, we've talked about, do you outfit suites with gaming rigs? People love to play between matches. I mean, these fans are players, and so I just couldn't agree more. You need to think outside the box. I also think it's a wasted revenue opportunity. I think a lot of times, priced correctly and given the right offering, you could be selling these spaces in these tournaments.
And Johan, I think you did some of that as far as providing demonstration space for the attendees, not just the athletes themselves.
One floor entirely together with PlayStation, where people only could play, and they did demos of the new games that were coming out in the next months. But we had a few hundred people playing at the same time as there were finals 1 floor up, because that was not the game they were interested in, so they went playing. But we also did the VR experiences, AR experiences, so it was really a large indoor esports festival.
And that's interesting, because to the extent that the venue will allow you to you're being creative there, which is great.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the venues will not allow you to be as creative as that with sponsorship opportunities and side events that take place. And we're very happy to share in the revenue upside with you guys, right? And because there's a sitting public there that could just, whether or not they've got the cash to spend it on the floor, that's another point in question. It's an interesting discussion point, because you do see fathers and sons and mums and daughters, to a certain extent, it's very heavily skewed male, come to venue. But whether or not they're going to part with huge cash on the day, difficult to say. But they may do in the future, and that's what.
With us now, it was not that good. But that's why we're trying to learn and to create, and we did it for 3 years now. So the second year, it looks totally different than the first year, because we try to learn and to evolve and to give different offerings. And the catering turnover went really up, but the first year, a lot of people, because it was a really long event, and they're used to going out of the venue, walk around and come back later. So you were missing your fans for maybe 1.5, 2 hours that are not in the building. And when they're out, then how do you get them back? So that's why we are tweaking to let them stay in the building, and that's why we have the playing areas and the demos, and just keep them in.
Todd, how do you think about day parts? Are you serving these people breakfast, lunch, and dinner? I mean, they're there all day. They're there multiple days in a row. So what are the offerings, and do you have to change them from day to day?
Yeah, again, we had a little chat before we started. You know, that is an area where most buildings aren't doing a good job. You know, and I'll tell you that we haven't done a good job in the past when we first started doing this. I mean, you do have to give people that day part. You have to recognize, and let's face it, big building concessionaires work off volume and standard menus and, you know, a small list of things. So it's not easy and it's not comfortable for most. But these fans demand it. I mean, you know, we're used to, you know, I'm sure people who work in sports know that you make most of your money from beverage within 2.5 hours of the match, mostly beer. No one at an esports tournament who gets there at 9 in the morning and is going to stay there at 10 at night is going to drink beer all day. And they're not going to eat hot dogs all day. They just can't. It's not, you know, and they want that variety. And there's nothing worse than going to the second day of a tournament and seeing the exact same menu at 9 a.m. in the morning as you know you're going to see at 5 p.m. at the end of the day. So yeah, it's really incumbent upon buildings and concessionaires to get this right, because you know, you'll hear some folks, and I'd be interested in what you learned. The per caps aren't huge. You know, if you look at per cap, which is how we measure the revenue, obviously per cap per hour for an esports event doesn't match anything like sports. Now, of course, sports are sandwiched into 2 hours, 2.5 hours, but you'd still expect a relatively large number over the day, but you don't have it, and that's because we're not giving people the right stuff to buy.
Yeah, I'd agree. I mean, we expected a bigger spend than we actually got. I think we ended up with about £15 a head. And we were expecting twice that, because you'd expect people to buy 3 times.
Yep.
But the mistake that we made, and the learning that we'll take forward into the next event, is we pitched it at burgers, chips, fish and chips, easy to, you know, consume food, whereas we do have the capability of turning on a bit more higher end food for street food. We do shawarmas, we do kebabs, we do vegetable curries. We've also got a real ale bar in partnership with Peaky Blinders and Saddler's Brewery, and it's all those things that I think would have added to it, and we just misread the audience. So next time round, they'll be available, and there'll be a different menu for breakfast, and there'll be a different menu for lunch, and etc. So I think that's where we can really improve our offering. I think, and I just want to underline the fact, everything else that we received in terms of the feedback from the customers was 8 out of 10 or above. The catering was down at 4 out of 10. So it's a real, it's like everybody notices how bad the coffee is when they go to a conference. You know, everybody
Except
knows.
this one.
Except
Coffee.
I haven't had a cup yet, so I'll tell you what I think later. But you know, everybody notices the food, because everybody needs to eat, and I think that's the main sort of hygiene factor for us.
And I'll go back to one thing that you both talked about. You can tell when a building's all in for an esports event. It really can. It's a completely different vibe. No one from Canada is here, I'm sure. So Vancouver this summer, where the international 2-week event from Canada. You're not from Vancouver, are you? Okay. Oh, you are. Okay. You didn't go to the event. You don't work for the Canucks. Okay. The Vancouver, you know, event. They moved it. Key Arena's going to go into renovations in Seattle, and they moved this big 2-week event up to Vancouver, and it was awful. It was awful. They were so uninterested in serving the fans, and you know, this is the big marquee event for Dota during the year, and you could just tell it was a huge difference between the experience. So when you see a building that goes all in, or someone that's willing, when we did League of Legends, now luckily we have a nice hockey team, we've got all the people in place, we have a street team, and the street teams went out and did marketing, and we have connections to local press. It was everything you said. There's a big difference between buildings really doing it and then just, as you say, taking a check.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen that as well. I mean, you know what, like even just on a hygiene factor, you've got kids in a venue who, you know, when they go to the restroom, they don't target particularly well, so you need to you need to make sure that the cleaning exercise is done properly. But you've also got an overarching male, community. So, you know, there's the things like that which you've just got to make sure that proportionally you've got enough toilets. So I did a walk around in the Istanbul. There's no one from Istanbul here, is there? I don't know. There could be 3 different stadiums I'm talking about. And I was like, why are we confining these guys who have paid the most amount of money to be courtside to one freaking toilet? And then the smoking area, because everyone smokes over there, why is it so small? Why can't we have? And I'm walking around making these calls, and I'm like, that should have been thought of up front. And so there are things like that we just need to think ahead and solve for, because they're simple, and they can have simple fixes, and you can open up a corridor to a further restrooms, etc. So But we're learning. I think everyone's learning in this space, and you know, even us on the organizer side, you know, we don't even know really what works and what doesn't work. We're tweaking the whole time. We're changing our agenda. You know, last week round we had a proposal on stage, right? So, well, how do you deal with that? You know, one guy wanted to get married, you know, invited. So, you know, there are things like that that we've never dealt before in sports. In sports, it probably happens all the time. So we've just got a lot to learn.
How do you view holding an event in London, which is very expensive, versus Birmingham, really good city, much less expensive? What's the balancing act there?
So it's a really interesting question, because at the moment, you know, we view ourselves as a global premium tournament series, right? So we really only want to be in, you know, the #1 premium destinations. But yet when you go to smaller cities, they're so much more welcoming, and they provide you with so much more service, that it does make it financially far more beneficial. You go to the O2 in London, I mean, they're just going to hit you with a fee that's crazy. They've got no availability. We were talking about this before, my teams tell me they need 4 days. Now the tournament's 2 days, right? They need 4 days or 4 to 5 days to be able to take the tournament through its period. And I'm challenging them to get that down to 3, you know, pull up and pull down. And, you know, if you do that at the O2, you're going to kill yourself. The P&L suffered from day one. So, yeah, I mean, the answer to that question is you've really got a balancing act. First year, can you even break even? No way. It's hard, really hard. You're investing in the city. So that's why you go to places around the world that are prepared to give you an investment. They're prepared to do some form of grant to enable you to come back year after year. And that's why you'll find sometimes esports is popping up in, you know, there's one in Tours in France. I mean,
Katowice in Poland.
Katowice in Poland.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Example. Yeah. No one's ever probably been to Katowice, but yet you...
Except for
these
sports, they've all been there.
So
I think the other thing too is the number of. I was talking to some of the folks from ESL when I was at CS:GO in New York a week ago, and they would tell you that, you know, big cities often are tough for them because they have so many options for entertainment. Right? It was a beautiful afternoon in New York on a Sunday, and you know, there was a ton of people there for the Counter-Strike, but you know, it's not as easy when you're the only game in town in Columbus versus you know, being in the middle of New York City. So.
Ian, for members of the audience that are also from venues in mid-market, so to speak, what advice do you have from them from a proposal standpoint to stand out against the Londons of the world?
I don't want to really give my competitors any any information, but no, I think it's fair to say one point that I thought of when you were discussing London versus Birmingham is the demographic and the disposable income and the accessibility of Birmingham as a city versus London. We were talking earlier about being able to get to Birmingham from London. And, you know, a lot of the north of London can get to Birmingham far easier than they can get to the O2, and we find that people will travel to something. We had, you know, people come from all over the world to our O2 tournament, and it was definitely a national pull geographically from within in the UK too. In terms of what the city can offer, I think it's really important, as I touched on earlier, about how we partner with the local councils, the regional councils, development agencies, what we can package together. But I think, as I have 2 venues, I have a city centre venue and a campus venue that's on the NEC. They've got different strengths. You know, at the NEC, there's a lot of exhibition halls around on the campus, so I can see that would support something maybe like an IEM that has an esports tournament and a large-scale exhibition around, and it's more of a full destination on one site. Whereas the city centre, we need to be smarter with how we partner with our neighbours and how we can expand. And we talked earlier a little about the festival feel of going to an event. It's not just what you can do inside the venue, it's about, you know, using the areas immediately outside. We border onto a canal, so that would be quite difficult for us on some sides of the venue. But there's areas around the venue. There's Brindley Place, which is a retail and restaurant area with a nice square and fountains. So the next time we think about partnering with them earlier to see how we can activate and use that space. So we're not just thinking about getting people in our venue and spending money. Yes, that's our ultimate aim, that's why we're there, but I think esports we've got to think differently. we've got to become part of the community. We can't just think about it being, you know, another client that comes and gives us 100 grand to rent it and they're away again the next day. It's more about being part of that community and growing with the community, the event organisers, the publishers, and understanding our audiences better and improving each time that we do it.
And just to continue that thought slightly, you haven't just hosted an event, you've hosted an exhibition as well. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how it's not just a gaming event, it's opportunities for your venue to host these exhibitions as well?
Well, Insomnia is one of the ones that we host on the NEC site. That's a game property. I think they sold it recently to Reed, potentially. I'm not 100% certain about the ownership of that, but essentially that's a gaming festival disguised as a consumer exhibition. So kids will pay to go along to the festival for the experience and sharing that communal experience, but there's a lot of activations, a lot of exhibition around that within the halls. They tried to partner that with live music 2 years ago to try and grow the appeal. That didn't quite work, and last time around they partnered with WWE, which I think has worked really well. There's more of a synergy there with WWE, so that will help them grow that audience for that event. We also host EGX on the NEC site as well, which I think is a fantastic event, and that is, you know, brazenly a consumer exhibition, and the consumers that attend that absolutely love it. It's a large scale exhibition, and everybody that's in the gaming world is there.
Well, we're getting close to time. I don't want to run out of time before we talk about drone racing. When I first read the description for this session, I didn't know what the hell that was. So, Jeroen, can you please fill us in on the drone racing event that you hosted?
Yeah, we did a large demo last year. We didn't know about drone racing until, well, 1 year before. Yeah. Drone racing, when you see it now, it's most of the times on YouTube, Instagram, and there are some events worldwide with crowd as an event like Esports. And we have in Holland an organizer, so we teamed up with him. Totally different side of Esports, but we took the ball off the stadium, made a big track, and yeah, we started racing. He's still building a brand, but we're there from the beginning, and we did it as a demo event with our sponsors, with our partners. He invited, I think, about 80 people from the branch. We did 600 people on the stands, free tickets to see what kind of crowd we would have, how they would react, and how we can tweak the event itself. So we did it last summer. We were expecting traditional esports nerdy student type people, but it turned out it was going to be a family event, because it was fathers, mothers with children coming to the event like they were going to the cinema. So totally different than we expected, but quite successful. So we're building up one for next year, and well, as a football stadium during the season we cannot do a lot on the pitch, but with events like drone racing, if you have all the obstacles like inflatables, you can also do it during the season. And in Holland there's still a winter stop for soccer, so I think we're going to be a December event, so we can host around Christmas.
And having that learning that, again, taking this back to the beginning of the conversation, preconceived notions don't always turn out to be true, and you have all these families coming into your venue. Yeah. There were opportunities for education, science and technology with all the kids coming into your building. Yeah. Can you speak to that piece of the puzzle?
Yeah, well, we invited a lot of our own sponsors. The organizer itself did as well, but what turned out that the Ministry of Defense was really interested, because drone racing and technique and all the new tech stuff they need. That was really interesting, but also that there's not enough people choosing beta studies in the Netherlands. And this is going to be a great way to promote different types of studies. So they're doing learning programs at schools now, and this is going to be like a big final. So they can build their own drones, they can do drone racing in VR, they can race with their own drones in the stadium, and on top of that there's going to be the big final, the public event, for the drone racing league. So and the fun part here is that we're doing it together as a partnership, and not handing over the key after getting the money, but we're going to the schools as well, and we're talking to the Ministry of Defense as well, and in that way, we try to keep the event also in the stadium for the longer term.
By the way, how the Ministry of Defense is not recruiting from Astralis' Counter-Strike team. I mean, these guys are the cold-blooded killers of esports. It's insane.
But I mean, actually, it's interesting because if you look at, I mean, it's very different in country to country, but in Scandinavia, I mean, esports is just huge, and so the amount of attention we get from the Prime Minister is insane compared to what you would get when actually you're in France and you say, oh hi, I work in esports, and they're like, esports, what is this? It's like, so most people still don't even know what that means, whereas Astralis, the guys walk down the street and they are God to most people. So I think it's a question of time before those perceptions change, and actually I think that will have a massive impact on how you guys welcome and think about hosting tournaments, and how people in the periphery around that, and how the press and the radio and everyone else thinks about it. And that will make a big difference to the way that we think about going to bigger cities or smaller cities as well.
We just covered like 1,000 miles, like an inch deep. So if there are any particular areas that we can go deeper for you, now's the time to ask those questions. Please.
Oliver Page, architect. I have a question. We haven't, it's up on the page there, esports versus traditional sports. And we thought only about esports, and yet most, apart from the NEC, is happening in sports environments. Yet there seems to be a complete separation. Are you thinking about integrating the clubs and the traditional sport package with the esport? Is that something?
No, we're already doing it. I think that there's the esports events, but we work together with Ajax, the football club, and they have their own FIFA team. But also we do it with Dutch national team. There's a FIFA league that we're playing at halftime in the stadium. They're playing at fieldside, and we're doing it on the big jumbotrons in the stadium. So I think that's a total different part from the other events, but it's really important to get it accepted and to get the general crowd understanding what they're doing.
And that's one of the reasons we invested in a team, and that's why, frankly, every sporting organization in America invests in a team, because they know that next generation. The biggest piece of data I saw probably 2 years ago was they did a study saying what's the overlap between traditional sports fans and esports fans. And I think the biggest one in the US was the NBA, and it was about 35%. And I remember one of the team owners saying to me in baseball, saying to me, oh, well, there you go, we don't have to worry about that. And I said, no, you don't understand. There's no overlap, because these generation aren't watching baseball, they're not watching hockey, they're watching esports. They're on Twitch and YouTube, they're spending their 70 million hours in a month watching that. So, for us, it was, when we made our first investment, it was all about understanding that next generation. I think we've tread very carefully, as every team has, in trying to do a crossover. We do some announcements at our building. We've done a few things with our ice hockey team, but you don't want to hit the traditional fans who are average age hockey is actually not as old as some, 47 years old, over the head with esports, but you want to create some, baby step synergy between the two.
So it's an interesting dynamic, because you've got certain countries around the world which have really embraced, football clubs or basketball clubs have embraced these sports and built their own entities off the back of it. In Germany specifically, you've got a real challenge there, where some of the Bundesliga is up in arms about some of the clubs building esports clubs, right? And I was on a panel with the guy from Hertha Berlin the other week, and he's had so much slack in the club from building a FIFA team. So I think it's a very delicate balancing act. The point around average age is crucial. In Istanbul, we actually hosted in the tournament the female Besiktas Counter-Strike team inside of our tournament, and we got them to play against the crowd. We were hoping that the females would beat the crowd, but they actually, sadly, two of the guys beat the girls, so that cost me 2 airline tickets to Copenhagen. But I mean, you really want to try and embrace it as much as possible. But this age thing is very, very challenging for traditional sports.
But the fun thing is that the emotions in esports are the same as in traditional sports.
Yeah.
So when we broadcasted the Dutch against Italy esports at the halftime, people were still shouting and rooting for the Dutch national team, but it was only electronic, but the emotions were the same. So if you incorporate it in that way,
Well, it sounds like the takeaway is that eventually esports will be traditional sports. There won't be that division between.
It'll just be
Is that fair to
sports.
say?
It won't be esports, it'll just be sports.
Yeah, I think
Because
so.
it's the next generation.
I think the word esports actually probably does it a disservice.
Yeah.
Well, it could have been like this morning with Rich calling it e-gaming, which,
I was hanging on.
again, there's a lot to talk about at lunch.
But the thing about it is, it's a new area. You speak to people about esports, they struggle to understand it. You have to say, oh, it's like this, and explain. It's sort of like how you would maybe position a sport in a gymnastics event or judo or boxing, or the games are like kind of different sports. You get into that conversation, almost like you need a t-shirt printed. But I think we, as an industry, if we can embrace esports and be the advocacy for it within our societies, it can only help with the knowledge of the benefits that it can bring. I think traditional sports, you go, do you want to host the Commonwealth Games? Yes, please. Here's a ton of money. Do you want to host an esports tournament? What's that? I think we've got a lot of work to do.
So I guess just to button this up, can each of you give us a closing statement to respond to that? What is the next 12 to 24 months look like in esports? Robbie, you want to take that one?
I think that we'll have a huge amount of the growth factor will kick in massively in the next 12 months. I mean, I think everyone in the stadium is going to host or be involved in esports in some capacity in the next 12 months if you aren't already. And yeah, welcome us with open arms.
Any other comments?
We as a venue have esports on our strategy now. It wasn't 12 months ago. We view it very much as part of our growth and our ambitions to grow the venue business. There's 32.4 million gamers in this country. It's approaching half of the country play esports in some way. The economy is booming. Is it 4 billion? Well, 4 billion. It's the 5th largest gaming market in the world.
It'd be 2 billion, Brian.
2 billion.
But even the studies on that are relatively poorly done, so we're not quite sure what it is.
And it's about spend on games and consoles
that's
and etc. etc. So it's very much there for growth, and it certainly will do, we think. So there'll be more people playing and more people wanting to go to tournaments, and more organisers want to organise tournaments.
Well, here's some rumbling behind the door. I do not want to be that guy that keeps you between your lunch, so I'm going to cut us off here. Please join me in thanking the panel.